Can I welcome everyone today to the last in the conversation series that surrounded the now sold-out season of the Bolshoi to Brisbane. This is the third and last lecture. The first lecture talked about how to read ballet, how to understand what it is that you're seeing. The second conversation talked about the ballet classics, what constitutes a classic or a master work. And today we're talking about how ballet came from France to Russia. I think it's a credit to QPAC that they're offering this free season of conversations around the ballet, and I'd like to acknowledge Janelle and Kate and the team for all their work in putting this series together. The purpose of the conversation series is to inform, to reveal, and to give context and meaning to the performances of the Bolshoi season. In preparing these notes, it took my mind back to my first trip to Russia in 1978, and there were 4 dancers went on that trip. We booked the trip on the same day at the same travel agents, and we arrived into Moscow and we were put in 2 cabs and sent to hotels on the opposite side of the city, and it took us 3 days to find each other because we didn't have mobile phones, or we had no idea how to find one another. It was January, it was minus 17 degrees, and the only signs of the West was a small McDonald's sticker on the bus that took us from the plane to the terminal. It's a trip that I'll never forget, really. I have very fond memories about that. So how times have changed from then. Today we're talking about how ballet came, how ballet made its way from France to Russia, its history and the development of its very distinctive style. To talk to these topics, we have 3 very knowledgeable speakers and lovely, generous people to share their thoughts and experience. You have the full CVs in your program, so I won't read the long version, I'll just give you the short version. Firstly, we have Valerie Lawson, who is a journalist and author. Valerie produced the magnificent program notes for both works that the Bolshoi are performing here in Brisbane. We also have Lee Shwin Singh, the artistic director of the Queensland Ballet, former principal dancer with Houston Ballet and the publisher of his international best-selling autobiography, Mao's Last Dancer. And last but certainly not least, we have Leo Schofield, former director of the Sydney Festival, journalist, television broadcaster, and significantly, Leo has worked with QPAC and his partner Ian McRae to make QPAC's international ballet series such a magnificent success. So Leo, we will be forever indebted to you for what you've helped us to achieve here in Brisbane. So thank you all for being here. The conversation will roam around for about 45 minutes, and then there'll be time for questions from you. So if you could save your questions till the end when we've got microphones, and can I also ask if you can turn off your mobile phones? That would be great. So Valerie, we might start with you by asking what seems to be a simple but is a very long, very convoluted question about how ballet came to Russia from France.
Well, ballet was in Russia before the early 19th century, but the big change came when a Frenchman called Marius Petipa, who hadn't got a very illustrious career at all, was suddenly invited to become a ballet dancer in the imperial ballets of Russia. So he went in the 1840s, and from a dancing beginning, not very illustrious, he just built and built and built until he created what really is or was Russian ballet in the 19th century. He can't be overestimated. But he was very French. He remained very French all his life, and all the years that he spent in Russia, he never actually learnt to speak Russian. He had a sort of pidgin Russian. He kept going back to France and, keeping his ties up with Paris and so on. And he succeeded other French choreographers as well, like Jules Perrault and Arthur St. Leon. So really, ballet in Russia in the 19th century, in the early days, was quite French, very, very French. But gradually, it became an amalgam of so many other influences. Because Petipa was there for so long as ballet master at the Imperial Ballet that he was able to bring Scandinavian teachers and an Italian teacher and dancer like Giacchetti, and all those influences merged and amalgamated. I think they reached their peak and pinnacle in Sleeping Beauty in 1890, when you've got a little bit of the Danish style, the Italian virtuosic style, and the whole thing is really a tribute to the Russian court system, the imperial court of the time. That's a setting. So Petipa, very unfortunately, went out of favour in the early 20th century and was virtually pushed out of the imperial theatres. It was very sad for him. But we're still indebted to Petipa, the Frenchman that made Russian ballet, for what we see today, Sleeping Beauty, Nutcracker Swan.
I think he did over 50 ballets, and a lot of the most lavish, most treasured ballets we still do today are pretty much from that era.
It's true.
From his vision.
So how do we, after all of those influences, how would you characterise the Russian style?
Well, I call it big with bite.
Lavish.
Lavish,
big
broad,
with
wide,
And typically,
acrobatic.
athletic, and require high technical skills because their training system is so good, which I think we will talk about the training system a little bit later on. But also you can characterize their ballets typically organized in either 2 acts or 3 acts. A lot of them actually in 3 acts because Russians love long ballets.
I think there's one other point we need to make, and that is that in Russia, the music took on a whole new importance. You had great composers like Tchaikovsky, who could compose a symphony, a string quartet, concertos, serious composers composing masterpieces, imperishable masterpieces for the ballet. And the Russianness of Russian music contributed to the Russianness of Russian dancing.
So Leo, you've been responsible, as I said, for bringing the Paris Opera, Cuban Ballet, Hamburg Ballet. What is it that made you want to bring the Russian ballet here?
Oh, it
Bolshoi.
seems sort of logical, really. There are wonderful companies in the world, but there are other companies that have a different aura, if you like. Dramatic acting companies, dance companies, all manner of, even circus companies. You aim, I think, or I always have, for the top. If I had to put together a food festival, I wouldn't look to somebody who made hash browns at Hungry Jack's. I would look for a serious name in food. In composing festivals, and I did 9 of them, arts festivals all up, I always took the view that what you should show the public is something that they could not see under non-festival conditions. In other words, something beyond the quotidian offering of our own very good drama companies and opera companies and dance companies. Just take it to another level. You can hear plenty of bohèmes and plenty of Toscas, but to do a really major opera, say like Strauss's Die Frau Schatten, you need huge forces, Wagnerian forces, and I think I like the idea of something that is really big, and also I love the notion of exclusivity. People say to me, is this going to Melbourne? And you just really wonder whether they've got their heads together, because to take these companies on tour is not possible. I mean, there are per diems, there are trucking issues, theatre availabilities that you would have to have coordinated all across the country. So big companies, on the whole, can only exist in this big context of a special series or within a festival context. And I think that's what gives these things such a special aura of the event. You see it at the Edinburgh Festival, the Salzburg Festival, the Wagner Festival, where you have to go to a particular place to see works of a particular quality and standard and rarity.
Valerie, can you talk a little bit about the political climate surrounding the creation of the Bright Stream?
I don't know how many of you have seen the Bright Stream, but you can see that it's set in Soviet times, and the Bright Stream was created in 1934 originally, in 1935, and premiered in Moscow in 1936. This was in the Stalin era, when Stalin was the absolute dictator of Russia, of course, and he dictated what writers could write, what artists could paint, what dancers could do, what choreographers could do, and they had to toe the party line, or there was big, big trouble. So when this premiered in Moscow, when it came to Moscow, the Stalin ordered the Pravda newspaper to attack it as a famous critique in the Pravda that said it was, a balletic fraud. You couldn't have peasants dancing in point shoes. You couldn't have non-authentic folk dances. The collaborators for that ballet were really horrified. Shostakovich never wrote another ballet score. The librettist was sent to a gulag, that's a labour camp, it was never seen again. The choreographer was marginalised, and all because of the system in Russia at the time, where there was a committee upon committee upon committee, which ended up with a general committee of the Communist Party dictating what you could do. It was terrible times, and the ballet was vanished, it just disappeared completely. They were tough, very, very tough times, mass murders, and such a happy ballet.
It's really no different to the time that we went through in China, where that political influence was so unbearable, where virtually every art form has to serve for Mao's political purpose. The ballets, like we could only dream of doing Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, Giselles, and Romeo and Juliet. We couldn't possibly do it. So anything to do with whatever written documents of these ballets were all burned. So they all been destroyed. If you ever find out you have hidden this, you'll end up in jail. So all of these Western ballets were all banned under Mao. So then the promoted, because ballet still was a popular art form. So they created these Chinese model ballets. Some of you probably seen the red detachment of a woman, the white-haired girl, all these ballets. So that's how I grew up with. It was incredibly political.
And in Russia as well, there was another red ballet, the Red Poppy. That was the first really, one that reflected the government of the time. It was in 1927, I think, and that was followed by so many others that paid homage to the Stalin regime. That lasted a long time, right up to Spartacus in the 1950s.
Lee, can you talk about some of the most significant choreographers and dancers from Russia over the last couple of decades?
Sure. I guess we probably start before Petipa, when some of the French ballet masters, choreographers were invited into Russia because, given the heritage ballet started from the French court, and then eventually that gone on to from Saint-Léon, passed on to Petipa, and Petipa then started that whole incredible renaissance really in dance. And then I guess there's quite a few of them. You've got Michael Fouquin, you got Nijinsky, Missing, and one of the famous ones we know in the Western world is Ballet. It's deeply from that influence, actually training in one of the best ballet schools called Vaganova Ballet School. And then in Russia, you got Yuri Grigorovich, which has been a very long-term director of the Bolshoi. And you go on to Nureyev, for example, who has done this famous Don Quixote for us, and also did a fantastic, very lavish Romeo and Juliet for the Paris Opera Ballet. People still raving about, but it's a huge production to move around. Just like Leo said, it's almost impossible because it's so big. And then you got, in today's era, you got Ratmansky, who is one of the hottest ballet choreographers around. He also directed the Bolshoi Ballet for a few years, but his heart was always in choreography. And I think the Australian ballet is about to see his new Cinderella later on this year. So I'm very, very much looking forward to that. But there's a lot of others. So that Russian influence penetrating into the Western ballet art form everywhere. When Nureyev, I remember, arrived in London, that created enormous stir. Then Baryshnikov, then you got Makarova. All these people have made incredible influence in the whole 1 or 2 generations of ballet in the West, actually.
It was a moment that I remember in this sort of my growing up with ballet when those dancers defected. Nureyev and then Baryshnikov and Makarova and we were talking in the second conversation about at that time, some of the Russian teachers came to Australia, but we held steadfastly to our English roots, and I remember there were teachers that couldn't find work in Australia who went to America and became millionaires in America, teaching and coaching, and because Australia wanted to stick to its English roots. But you mentioned Ratmansky, who was responsible for the 2 ballets we have on here at the moment, Corsair, that's finished, and the Bright Stream. Valerie, can you talk about Ratmansky's influence?
Ratmansky is a kind of merger. What he does is a merger of the East and the West, if you can still define regions geographically like that, because he was brought up in Russia. He is a Russian. He trained at the Bolshoi school, but then he went as a dancer to Canada and then Denmark. And when he was there, he was, especially in Denmark and Canada, he was learning the works of contemporary choreographers like Mats Ek and Kilian and so on. So he brought all that knowledge back to Russia, back to Moscow in 2003-4. And it was actually the Bright Stream that he produced as a freelance choreographer that won him the job as the artistic director. And he told me, I interviewed him about 2 weeks ago, and he told me that during the rehearsals, the dancers all went up to the general director's office. I don't know how they had the nerve to do that, but and said, we love this ballet, we love what he's doing. And the general director called Ratmansky into his office and said, we're offering you the artistic directorship of the Bolshoi. And Ratmansky said, are you sure? We haven't had the premiere yet. And he said, no, we're sure. You're our man. But he found the politics of the Bolshoi so arduous and so difficult, all that history. So he went to New York. He's really still now in New York. But he's in demand around the world. He's committed to 20 weeks a year in New York. The rest of the time he's flying to right around the world, Australia, as you said, Lee, and London, Canada. He is the most influential choreographer in the world today, in my opinion, because he's brought back the narrative form to ballet. There's been so much contemporary, abstract ballet. But he's brought the story back, and you can see that so much in Bright Stream. People love it because of the story.
There is that story narrative has, there's less and less people are capable of doing now. And particularly the ones doing very well are even more rare. So I think that's one of the important things that has emerged with his skill and his background, his traditional background from Russia, be able to merge the two, and which is very important for dance today.
It's the capacity to do those story ballets, full-length story ballets. They're probably, you can count those choreographers on
We don't have Ashton
one
Macmillan
hand.
and people like that.
It's a rare gift, and it's one of the most difficult things to do. So you can create movements, you can interpret music brilliantly to abstract movements, but to be able to really tell the story well through movement without words is a really special art form. It's a special ability.
But it's also finding the, sorry Leo, it's also finding the stories, isn't it? What are we going to tell? What are the stories? I know the film industry is talking about this all of the time. Where are the scripts to make the films about? So it's one thing to be able to tell a story, but it's, you need to find the story that captures people's hearts in the first place. Sorry Leo.
But beyond the narrative ballet, there is a world of extraordinarily beautiful dance that is, in a sense, abstract. And the interesting thing to me is the Russian bloodline, and it's almost like thoroughbreds. There's a wonderful tale in the biography of Mathilde Chesinska, who was an imperial ballerina, and she was the mistress of the Tsar, and the last Tsar of Russia, until he became engaged to Alexandra, and then she was cut off without a penny. Well, with plenty of money, I think, but cut off really from any kind of intercourse. And she retired to Paris. She fled Russia after the revolution, and was having dinner there, and she met George Balanchine, who was then, again, he was a Russian dancer. Balanchine was his I guess, anglicised name. And she recalled that she had danced in a ballet called La Fille de Pharaon, which the Bolshoi has revived. It's a story ballet set in ancient Egypt, where the ancient Egyptian costume is the tutu, in case you didn't know. And they're all coming up with pyramids and tutus. And there's a scene where the pharaoh's daughter is firing an arrow at a tree full of monkeys, and Balanchine was one of the monkeys in that, and he recalled that in his meeting with this 83-year-old ballerina. But I like the idea that Balanchine then went, and with all of his Russian background, absorbed an American style, and now is almost seen as the quintessential American choreographer. And a good deal of his choreography, to me at least, is, some of it is really cheesy, but I think there are some really marvellous, I think his Four Temperaments to Music by Hindemith is one of the great abstract ballets. And Killian, of course, is another one, again, through you can trace bloodlines all the way out of the Stuttgart post-war period, Neumeier. They'll all have links somewhere or other. If you made this great big chart, you'd see all of the interactions and influences that occur. But the most predominant one, clearly, as my colleagues here say, is Russian. And what one sees in the best contemporary work is what marks Russian dance out from the rest, and that is power. I mean, it's extremely powerful dance. I mean, Lee would know that those dancers take some terrifying risks in the scale of their leaps and jumps, and energy is one of the things that it characterized. And perhaps it's that very vitality that has enabled it to survive revolution and terrible purges against artists who were just simply taken away and put a bullet in the back of their neck. I mean, it was a terrible time. But for art to have survived and then, in a sense, be depoliticized. You will have read, in talking to Ratmansky, you will know that he's not really interested in revisiting the political past. He's interested in the music of Shostakovich, but he doesn't want to recreate, in a sense, an absolute replica of a ballet that might have existed in 1935, or indeed an earlier one like Le Corsaire. He's added other touches to those things and given... And Nureyev did the same with... Nureyev recreated all of the great Russian classics for the Paris Opera Ballet, and he gave it his own take on the West. By that time he'd lived there a good time, but the lines are still... The bloodlines, if you like, are still there.
Leo, Valerie mentioned before how intensely political big companies are, and you know, the Bolshoi and the Kirov, 200 dancers, they're the biggest companies. So in your dealing with them, I mean, Chatham House rules, it won't go outside of this room. Were there any, is there something different about the way you need to negotiate about bringing the Bolshoi here?
No, it was really simple. They were very pleasant, and we actually wanted to bring the Sleeping Beauty production with which they reopened the new Bolshoi Theatre. Another $800 million was spent on refurbishing that theatre. And it's ravishingly beautiful. It's a bit shiny perhaps, but it'll settle down. But they did a Sleeping Beauty to mark the opening, and it was a chance for them to display the full range of their character dancers and their ballerinas, and Zaharova and the American David Hallberg danced the opening night, and it was the most ravishing set. But to get it to Brisbane, and it was three-dimensional, with these wonderful twisted columns like you see in the Vatican, you know, in the Baldacchino in St. Peter's. But they'd really have to put a chainsaw down the middle of them to get to them. And they said, oh, we'll make you a soft set where it'll be just... Because they said, but the point of the whole thing is it is three-dimensional, and then that's part of the brilliance of the look. So apart from a debate about that, and also an acknowledgement that other companies such as Lee's or the Australian Ballet might be doing the same work in relatively close time proximity, lead you eventually to settle down to what the actual repertoire might be. And I must say that it was fascinating to me when Bayadere came here. It's not a well-known work. It had been seen once, I think, when the Royal Ballet came here. But when it came to Brisbane with the Paris Opera Ballet, and okay, that's a powerful brand name, but Brisbane took to it. That was a sold-out season too, a wonderful season of a ballet that nobody had really had much familiarity with. And that encouraged us to think, well, let's put on something that's a little bit different. And Corsair's never been seen in the country. Bright Stream is pretty much a fresh new ballet. And so you bring it to Brisbane and you think, boy, you might get away with it in Sydney or Melbourne, but Brisbane, that's just patronising rubbish. The audience here is really ready to have a go at something new. And that, for us, is the most exciting thing because it opens all sorts of possibilities in the broader term for what might be presented within QPAC's extremely ambitious and visionary international series.
And long may they keep coming, Leo.
Let's hope it.
Lee, if I can turn to you to talk about the Russian training methods, the Vaganova Method, which is often quoted at Australian schools as being the preferred training method. Just what is the Vaganova Method, and to what extent is it really taught here as it perhaps it was originally conceived?
Well, I went through a quite detailed Vaganova training at the Beijing Dance Academy. When Mao took over power in China, at the time, the first few years, Russian-Chinese relationship is still very strong because the Russians under Lenin, Stalin pretty much fund Mao's revolution. So they backed financially, militarily. So that's how Mao actually won the war at the end. So for a few years, their political ideology is still aligned. So then China sent a lot of scientists, artists out to Russia to be trained. So Russia's lending them all kind of support. So a lot of my mentors, my teachers, were the people first sent to Russia to be trained under the Vaganova training program. So they brought that whole training syllabus back, very detailed 7-year training syllabus. And so I went through that. Then later on, I had the privilege to compete in Russia, in Moscow, and then after the competition, I went to St. Petersburg, and I paid homage to the Vaganova school. I was so excited, but I have to say, in my book, I have a picture posing arabesque on the steps of the Vaganova school, but that was on the way out. I have to say, I was disappointed with what I saw there. I had expected a lot more open-mindedness, a lot more, because I think even though they have steeped with incredible traditions, they got famous, graduates such as George Balanchine, Nureyev, Bolshoi, and all these fabulous, famous people. But their training was, to me, was so exaggerated. I mean, simply, for example, we would be, doing a plie straight up and down, but they will be going like that. They will be so distorted, and everybody's holding the umbrella like for dear life. And so forced, whether you have turnout or not, you'd be forced to be in the perfect or overdone, positions. So now I had a bit of, discussion through the, interpreter and all that about their training and all that. I found them very, very close-minded, where that's how I was when I first went to the West. Because technically I can do so much more than the most 99% of the kids in my age or older, because that training was so vigorous. We virtually start from 5:30 in the morning to 9 o'clock at night, 6 days a week. We train like that. So for us, for dance in the audience, you know that we normally in the West, we train for a typical class. We would train for about an hour and a half. There we do a ballet class, lasts 2 hours. We do our bar work for 15 minutes. The rest of the 2 hours, we did jumps and turns, just relentlessly. So, even if you're, a person with no brain, you end up would be able to jump and turn because the workload is so strong. But what is incredible about the work, about the probably, I think, what the Chinese people have really adopted, really subsequently they've trained some beautiful dancers from that training, so I can't really badmouth that training, but I should be grateful, is that training was so detailed. The first couple of years was truly slow moving, was agonizingly slow, but it was so detailed, so foundation, you laid such great foundation. All of a sudden, before you know it, the way they progress in their syllabus, all of a sudden you just took a huge leap each year. So because that foundation was so important. And I think that's what I see in the Western world. The training is not nearly that detailed. And so I don't know whether our society is suitable for that kind of training because it virtually hinges on, over-discipline. For me to go back to China now, even then the Beijing Dance Academy has changed. They have opened their training syllabus to adopt from the Danish training, the French training, like the Cubans, and like where Carlos Acosta come, which we worked together at the Houston Ballet. He said that their training was originally learned from Vaganova, but they really opened from Alicia in Alonso's era. Yeah. They really opened up to the Western really influence. So I think to come back a long-winded way to answer your question about the training in Australia, the Australian Ballet School had, in the recent years, have been trying to adopt that Vaganova training system. I'm not sure they are there yet. I'm not sure they have enough experienced teachers to really teach that syllabus. Anybody can teach from a book, but you have to have that experience to be able to teach it well. And I'm not sure that they still got a way to go. And other schools across Australia, I think we are pretty much dominated by RAD and Cecchetti over the years.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was lucky enough to have Russian teachers, Chunova, Yanina Chunova, and I remember somebody saying, they're adopting the Vaganova method, and she was so dismissive of that, saying, that's so yesterday in Russia. And yet, we're still talking about the Vaganova method, but there aren't many circumstances where children can study 6 days a week, all day, and that's what the system called for. I mean, it was intensive training for hand-picked students. They looked at the parents, the physiques of the parents and the grandparents, and
well, also, I mean, as a director today, I really put a lot of emphasis on our students, our children, to have a normal education as well, not just ballet. Because at the end of the day, they still have a long life to live after their dance career. So it's a responsible way to encourage them, find a way to have them have a normal academic education. So, we're trying to find a way to help our dancers, even they get into the company, still find avenues for them to be educated, further their education along the way.
Yeah.
I think it's a huge task for us in the Western world because there are so many possibilities for these kids, and how to keep them interested, how to really, where's the balance? Whether do we pick them to form relationships with a lot of ballet schools around the country and just concentrating them for the final 3 or 4 years. Maybe that's the way we look at it. Yeah. That's the model we look at it. So we still allow them to have that normal education in their schools and in their local ballet schools, and we will be able to select the top talents to come for the final intensive training program with us.
But it's difficult, isn't it, for a company your size when you might be doing works by various choreographers. So in a way they just need a clean technical style over which you can overlay a choreographer's stylistic preferences.
I think that's right. I think the training has to be pure. Whatever that training is, it has to be pure technical achieve technical skills. Then the choreographers come in with their own different styles lay on top of that, because the foundation is there for them to, the technical skills is there for them to then go on reflecting balancing style or Ratmansky style or Yuri Killian style. So I think then will be easier, because I mean, I work with people like Yuri Killian, Christopher Bruce, Kenneth Macmillan. They all inevitably pick the same brilliant dancers, same good dancers that stand out in their technical skills, in their pure technique. They all love this dance. They all use them as the lead in their ballets. So whatever the style you are, you still fell in love with the people with beautiful technique.
Valerie, can I just take you back really now? We've talked a little bit about how ballet went from France to Russia and a bit about the technique and the characteristics. Can you talk about some of the notable Russian classics from the 19th and 20th centuries and perhaps the masterpieces from the 21st century?
Well, from the 19th century, I think I said the Tchaikovsky ballets, you know, they are the pinnacle, really, the three Tchaikovsky, Petipa, Ivanov ballets, but also you can't forget Petipa's Don Quixote, Raymonde, Le Bayadère, Leo Bort, and then the whole Ballet Russe era, all those ballets, Petrushka, Sylphide, Parade, Spectre de la Rose, The Firebird, Rite of Spring. That was an enormously creative period, enormously, and it was all compacted within about 20 years, 1909 to 1929 when Diaghilev died. I think then there are only a few ballets from the Soviet era that we could really say are still very, very worthwhile seeing again or respecting, and that would be Prokofiev's Cinderella, Spartacus, although it looks very dated now, and particularly Grigorievich's Spartacus of 1968. Lee, I don't know, what do you think? Is there some more from the later 20th century before we come to Ratmansky?
Yeah, not many.
Not many.
I could be wrong, but I think the era of the Petipa era have created some of the most, profound, if you call it innovation in ballet. It's really made a lot of breakthroughs, which we are still benefiting today. We still enjoy today. Whether along the way, different people like Nureyev, Baryshnikov put their own little touches on, but the core, the foundation, the 90% of that, those ballets still pretty much intact. That's why we still love that traditional aspect. But there, I don't know whether it's the communism restriction, limitations have really choked off that creativity in Russia. So then all of a sudden the Western choreographic sense, the creativity flourished. And then that's where the Balanchines and the Ballet Russe era starting to really took root. And then when I went to Russia for the competition, I saw Grigorievich's Ivan the Terrible. It was a dreadful ballet. I couldn't keep myself really awake throughout the night. And lovely to see the dancers be able to do hard stuff, technically hard stuff. But you can only stand so much more because the story is not interesting, and the choreography is not that interesting. But yet, I think the Western, if we fast forward 100 years from now, I think if you're looking back, I think the Western creativity, or the way we choreograph the drama we put into it, and from the Ashton, the Macmillan, Krenkel era, I think that influence now going back to Russia to really start to really influence the other way now.
Well, Russia wasn't allowed, the Russians weren't allowed to do that.
Sure, exactly.
Ballets, and,
Yeah.
and the Bolshoi now does. Jules has just been done, the Balanchines Jules has just been done with great success. They've revived a new Bayadère. They would have all been thought hopelessly decadent.
I think when I went back there, I felt in the 80s, I find they still very much almost live in a bubble. They still sort of live in a trance, a state. they are still very proud of their Raimondas and of the stuff they still do for the last 40, 50 years, and they haven't really progressed to the whole new era. I mean, I think they are trying. They still get people like Nacho Eduardo back there to direct, and they're having David Holbrook there at the Bolshoi. I think they are trying their way, try to open up.
So when I went to Russia about 18 months ago, I interviewed Sergei Filin, the artistic director, and he told me that he was trying to get more and more Kilian, Mats Ek, and all those Western choreographers, but there's big resistance. There's a whole section there that says, no, we're not interested in that. So that's the tension that Ratmansky had to face as well when he was artistic director. Yeah. So, that merger is hard to make.
Yeah, so do you think very little contemporary work is created, or it's not supported, or we don't get to see it, or...
Possibly.
There's just great resistance
If it was really good, we probably would get to see it, though, I think.
I think we don't understand the extent to which Russia, the ballet is part of Russian culture, in the same way as opera is just built into the Italian genetic system. It's just, it's one of their art forms that they created, they own. It's popular across all classes. It's very interesting to sit in a Russian audience, as Valerie will have done and I did recently, and have a look around, because it's not all toffs and it's not all students, and radicalism hasn't hit them yet. Where radicalism has, I think, almost kind of exploded is in opera production, where it's possible to argue that a great work of art, whether it's Hamlet or a Wagner opera, will survive really terrible productions because the music will be great, or there will be one great acting performance in it. But it will be capable of limitless possibilities. And I think the great masterpieces will live on, and they will survive mad interpretations, and they'll still have appeal. The difficulty for us, I think, is to find a way of accepting something that is new. I mean, I was chairman of the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, and I could tell you one way to clear a hall was to program a piece of contemporary music. And the way to fill it was to do Beethoven. And there are timeless masterpieces that will remain, I think, markers of any culture. And some of them may be very strange markers, but they will be there as part of the soul, the nature, the whole personality of the country, the emotional whack that you will get from a certain work. I mean, the Americans standing with their hands on their heart while they play the national anthem, that sort of thing doesn't affect other people quite the same way.
Although on the opening night of Le Corsaire, the orchestra played the Australian national anthem and then the Russian national anthem, and it's a really stirring, the hair stands up on your back of the neck, and the people in front of us turned and said, "We're Russian." So passionate and proud about the fact that we were going to see the Bolshoi.
That's a little tradition that I must say I introduced for all of the international series. We've mostly had either the Governor or the Governor-General present at that opening, and we play the national anthem of this country, and behind the curtain there are artists waiting to perform, and they hear the national anthem of their country, whether it's Cuba, France, whatever. And that, I think, not only lends a sense of occasion among an audience member, but it certainly gives the performers ready to go on a bit of an extra buzz. They're dancing for their country.
I think that's a really nice touch, Leo. Yeah. I probably need to copy you.
Oh, I agree. Go for it.
But I have to find an excuse to be able to come up with the second national anthem.
For Australia. Well, the point is, the others usually make us look a bit haggy.
Yeah, they do.
I think you get people into the swing, to the right mood.
But Sue's absolutely right. The Russian anthem is really amazing, and of course, nothing beats the French. But there you go.
Well,
we're working on it.
It's time to hand over to the audience. There are some folk with microphones. They're going to come down the front. So if you've got a question, now's the time to ask. There's one right in the front.
Maybe you can just ask and we can repeat the question.
I'll throw this open to any of you, just to maybe talk about any distinctions in the style of the Bolshoi and the Kirov, which I believe is now being known as Mariinsky. Because am I right in thinking Nureyev came from the Kirov and Baryshnikov was Bolshoi?
No,
No,
Baryshnikov is
both
also
Kirov.
from the Kirov too.
Kirov.
I guess, if I may say, I think the Kirov was a bit more refined, romantic style, softer style. The Bolshoi is a lot more bravura. And I think historically too, the Bolshoi tend to be seems a bit more influenced from some of the Italian ballet masters from time to time. So that whole bravura and more peasantry, more folk dance stuff tend to be a bit more seeped into their style of dancing. That whole earthiness, and so they tend to do much bigger jumps and leaps and all that. That whole dynamic is a lot more with a huge force, where I think the Kirov bit more sort of quite refined and a lot more detailed in their training. Again, sort of that also come from the Vaganova training as well. But in there, so the likes of really Sleeping Beauty, for example, probably more suited for the like of Kirov, and the Don Q,
Bolshoi,
Corsair, more
Yeah,
Bolshoi.
It's interesting that Petipa went to Moscow to create Don Quixote, because the audience was supposedly more receptive to that kind of earthy story and choreography.
I mean, we were talking earlier when some of the French and Italian masters went to pass on the ballet knowledge in Russia, and they started this thing called kayuk, which is really in English is like a theater gallery, where that's mainly in Moscow. They put out wooden benches out into the theater. It's like town hall style, and so people pay very little money. So almost anybody could afford, peasants could afford to come in to watch them dance. So there are a lot of folk dance stuff happen there, stamping the ground, all that, so really, and walking, this Russian walking very low down stuff, and double tour landing on the knee, for example. So those kind of really daring stuff flourished there. But I wouldn't think the Kirov necessarily really did that.
There is, in fact, a distinctive group of dancers at the Bolshoi that are used for character parts. And you will have seen in Corsair women dancing in heels, small heels. And so the pirate girls all dance, the folk tradition is there. The Moiseyev Dance Company, which was a folk music dance company, came out of the Bolshoi. These dancers will do the folk music. They'll do the Chechen lezginka, up standing, the men standing with their toes really doubled over on point, but without wearing points. And a whole lot of folk traditions in operas like Boris Godunov, in the Polish scene. The dancers will not wear points. They will wear heels. And in a lot of the traditional Russian classics, that's one of the... And you mix them up too, as you will have seen. Some of the dancers wear them and some don't.
Well, you can easily see that in even things like Swan Lake and Sleeping Beauty. It's always that diverse, Spanish or sort of in Mazurka and all that. So they all these folk dances always, even these classical ballets, are very popular.
There's a question at the back.
There's one.
Why did Stalin ban right stream? I mean, I couldn't understand why. Maybe I don't speak Russian, but what was it?
Well, he began by hating Shostakovich's opera, Lady Macbeth from Mzensk, which is a pretty violent opera, and he hated it. And there was a running feud between Stalin and Shostakovich. The word that they used was, it was banned or it was decried on the basis of formalism, whatever that may mean. But Shostakovich never wrote another ballet score, and he didn't write another opera. He wrote symphonic music and some of it celebrated the siege of Leningrad, and he conformed a bit because he needed to compose, and that was his life. But he didn't. He and Stalin had a very uneasy relationship.
So it wasn't so much about the philosophy of socialism?
No, well, I actually have a quote here of what he said about this is from the program of the first performance in Moscow in 1935. And Shostakovich wrote an introduction to it, and it was a piece called My Third Ballet. And he said, to create a major ballet on a Soviet theme is a difficult and responsible task, but I'm not afraid of difficulty. To keep to the beaten track is perhaps easier and safer, but it's also boring, uninteresting, and pointless. And he went on to say what a very simple plot he had about urban artists popping out into a collective farm. Collectivization was one of the biggest disasters of the Soviet era. 6 million people died of hunger, so it really wasn't a very successful experiment. But he wrote about Soviet artists going to the country. But in the end, he put a final note that said, the music, in my view, is light-hearted, entertaining, and most importantly, danceable. Well, I don't think Stalin was light-hearted or even entertaining. So I think there was probably a natural collision of personalities there.
Yeah, they do. They do have, from the Vaganova training, we had half-yearly exams. And according to the syllabus we have, so the teachers will all, I mean, it was scary. The teachers will all sit down in the hall of school. The teachers will sit behind the desks, and we will be performing. And those technically, we have to be able to accomplish certain technical skills at each half-year level. So if you don't, then you're going to have a cross rather than a tick next to your name. So it's the teachers are under incredible pressure as well as the students. And then at the beginning it was more technical, and then as you get to senior years, you get to be more performance oriented, then that musicality, the artistry comes into the assessment as well.
I'd just like to say, before I came to the conversation series, like many people, I believed, ballet began with the Sun King and his partner in France. So I thank you for enlightening us. But I was just wondering, when you're creating ballets for Australian audiences, are you bringing in an eclectic mix? I know you were saying you like to keep it pure, and yourself with the Russian ballet companies, but were you interested in making an eclectic and making this multicultural to represent the Australian multicultural dynamics? Yeah.
Who's that question to me, is it? Or to all of us? Yes, I guess as a director of Queensland Ballet, even though I want to establish our company as a classically based ballet company, which has always been the tradition, and I think it's the right way. But at the same time, I'm very mindful about to create that diversity, create that balance, and between the classics and the traditional, and as well as the new and the contemporary neoclassical. So and it's between international and Australian. But I would like to think, sort of, we will be given the opportunities to Australian-based choreographers, and if I can find local Queensland choreographers, I will definitely give them that chance as well. But I have to be also mindful, ballet is such an international art form. and it judged by the international standard always. So even though politically might be what I need to do, but I have to be always mindful where I want to take this company to, which is that international standard. So in every sense, we'll be judged, and I will judge myself and our company according to that principle. Ian, that's a really good question. I guess when I say the Vaganova being really rigid, I will say I still have to qualify. There's some wonderful things. It's probably still one of the best ballet trainings out there. I think they still train some fabulous dancers. But I think today, the training, like if you look at the French training, if you look at which has produced the French Opera Ballet School, is one of the best ballet schools in the world. They have produced just phenomenal, pure classical ballet dancers like the Subigiams of the world. And then you look at people from coming out from Cuba, for example. And this, again, Spain now, they come out with some beautifully trained dancers. And they are technically and pure classical sense, and it's incredible. What they have been doing, though, they have been adapting the best of different disciplines. So be able to really adapt the best of the Danish training, which is very fabulous for feet work, clean feet work, but not known for these huge jumps. But the Russians have these enormous jumps. And the Cubans and the Spanish now can turn fearlessly. So if you can marriage some of the best training syllabus, I don't care what training, what mixed training that is, as long as you produce me a fantastic dancer, that's the mandate I give to my theater training, then you are successful.
How free are the Bolshoi ballet people to experience Australia? And outside the theatre, can they go anywhere they like or do what they like?
Oh, absolutely, they've been hiring cars and driving around and shopping like mad.
Lone
All right, so
buying Ugg boots. Lots of Ugg boots. They're very free to go, but they have obviously classes and they have to turn up for those.
I think it's a whole different time now, isn't it?
It is.
Even some of the like the National Ballet of China, for example, come over here, and there's still curfew hours, so you still have to be back in the hotel after certain hours. But during the day, they can pretty much free to go in restaurants and do shopping.
And when the Bolshoi came out and other Russian companies in the 60s and 70s even, the KGB agents would accompany them and report back.
Well, when during my time, if you do have a privilege to get out of China to go on tour, the first thing they do is the leader of the group will confiscate your passports when you get to a country. So even if you defect, stay in that country, you've got no passports. But really those times, if the country where you are defecting to willing to give you a political asylum is not a problem, but you can't just all of a sudden disappear because you got no identity.
I remember in conversations on that first trip that I did, Leo, with some Moiseyev dancers, we talked about the famous dancers that had defected, and they were saying that they were scared of two things. Firstly, the repercussions for their family who were left. That was the very first consideration. The second consideration was that they were very scared about the notion of choice, because at that time, if three people looked like they were standing in a queue formed because they thought at the other end was food to buy. So they were, we walk into a supermarket and there are 20 toothpastes that we can buy. It wasn't like that. They just bought whatever it was that they could get at that time. But the notion of choice scared them. How do we choose between, when you've got 20 toothpastes, which one do you choose if you've got no idea?
Well, we all have that crisis. In a supermarket, it's got an aisle full of sun creams. I don't know. I might just like to pay a little compliment to Lee here. I sat in on the training because we've been talking a lot about training, of the kids and the selection of the local kids that were going to appear in Le Corsaire. And a very fine older character dancer now who played the chief eunuch in Corsaire was training them and eliminating the ones that he didn't think were right in terms of height or attitude. And he got the 6 kids that you saw on stage actually dancing. And I asked him what he thought. He said, very good, very good. He said, as good as Moscow. Oh. So, and one of the kids came from Toowoomba, so that's not exactly easy to learn from the school. Yeah.
We're certainly very, very grateful for the opportunity for our kids to have that opportunity to work with the Bolshoi theatre. They will just be the highlight of their lives. But we are also very proud of our kids. I think they have done us proud.
And they had a lot to do.
Yeah.
You know, they were acting and involved in the scenes and dancing and...
They were very cute.
They were very cute.
Just maybe one final question.
I have the mic. Is it coming through?
Yes?
Yes.
Oh, hi. I wanted to ask Lee.
I have a question. Should I stand up? All right. Professor Steele, I have a question. But first of all, I'd like to ask, is there anyone else here this afternoon who was in Sydney when the Monte Carlo Colonel de Basile Ballet Russe was marooned there? All right. Regard me as a link.
Yeah.
Because I was very privileged when I was 2 years younger than the baby ballerinas. I was learning dance, and my question is, why did Australia go to RADA and the English method after the war, when before the war the Cecchetti method was taught, and also Valerie Lawson, they brought the ballets that you tell us this afternoon were derived from the very creative period much earlier. They were the ballets that came to Sydney, plus Petrushka. And I will never forget, I had indulgent parents, and I had a friend who was a Finn and a real balletomane. And between the two of us, we went to see every ballet that was put on, which was a tremendous privilege, which I will never forget. And I did get in touch with Irina Baranova late in life when I was going to Finland to see my friend after 56 years. And I took her the book, and I had a little correspondence with Irina, and my friend was delighted. So my question is, why did we then, when Borovansky was scouting for people with Elaine Kirsova after the war and approached my mother, I'm 86 now, nearly, and why did we go with the English ballet school? When the ballet Rambert came out, I was not happy at all.
Well, I think the first half of the century, of 20th century, was Russian in terms of Australian ballet, and then became English, partly because of the Rambert ballet that was sent out by the British Council after World War II in order to keep Australia tied to the motherland. That was part of a political campaign by Britain. They were frightened we might go towards, the American alliance after the fall of Singapore and various events like that. There were RAD teachers, though, in the 1930s, and Cecchetti teachers here as well. But the Rambert ballet kind of got an English tinge to us, and then Peggy Van Praag came out in 1960 to take over from Borovansky just briefly when he died, of course. And then the ballet here became very British with Peggy Van Praag. That's true, isn't it? It was just it changed utterly then. And the RAD is the biggest teaching organisation in Australia still.
I think the British are very clever with their colonising skills.
They didn't do so well in Tasmania.
Their organizational skills is next to none. They are so good at organizing, and an RAD has a really detailed, sort of progression in a system. So they are the probably the most user-friendly kind of, really system in dance today.
It's an interesting question, though, because if that hadn't been the case, you wonder how dance might have developed. The teacher I was trying to remember the name of before was Jürgen Schneider, who was Baryshnikov's coach. And he came to Australia and he couldn't get work. And he went back to America, and I met him years later in the green room at the Australian Ballet, and he said, "Oh, thank God for Australia." He said, "I went to America and I became a millionaire." Teaching. One last question over there.
One last question. That segues very nicely, that last question. I'd like to ask Lee and Leo. Lee, here we are in the Asian century now, not the not the other century, the previous one, or the one before that for that matter. In the Asian century, Lee, who would you name as, say, the two finest ballet schools coming out of Eastern Asia, North, South, or wherever? And Leo, when can we expect to see one of them here?
When can you expect to see?
To see one of them here. So, Lee, where would you put your money on that count?
You mean ballet schools in this region? Definitely the Beijing Dance Academy. That's really I would say, the best ballet training school in this all Asia-Pacific region. I'm scratching my head for the second one. I would probably say, I'm not being biased at all, I would say probably the Australian Ballet School will be the next one. I would probably put the Shanghai Ballet School very close to it. Because I really, Shanghai Ballet School have produced some lovely dancers in the past, but I would say probably the Beijing Dance Academy as the number one come to my mind, and the Australian Ballet School probably will be the number two in this region, and we would want to be the number two very soon.
For me, we don't bring schools, we bring companies. So I guess it is whichever company emerges. I have bought companies from Asia for festival participations, most notably the famous one from Taiwan, the Cloud Gate Company, which was magnificent. But ballet, I'm not able to identify a company that I think would do for Brisbane, a company coming out of Asia that would do for Brisbane what, say, the more traditional companies such as the Bolshoi or the Paris Opera Ballet really do for the city and do for the ballet-loving public. They raise the bar. It raises the bar when you see a company like this, and artists are inspired and audiences are inspired, and our tastes become, hopefully, somewhat more elevated.
I think because I know the National Ballet of China very well, if you purely look at the dancers' technical abilities, they are fabulous. But where they fall short, number one, obviously they don't have the brand name as the Bolshoi and the Paris Opera Ballet and the Royal Ballet and the American Ballet Theatres of the world. But also, I think because of the years of the starvation from the communist system, they are really severely lacking in blockbuster ballets. So they haven't produced, except the political ballets, which the red detached woman, white hair girl should be burned, buried, really. Besides those ballets, there's nothing of their own identity. Zhang Yimou trying to come up with concept with National Ballet, create this ballet called the Race of the Red Lantern, based on the movie.
Yeah.
And there's some really good ideas, but we're falling short of the international standard is the dance choreography.
Content.
The design was fantastic. The concept, the story was really interesting. It's really uniquely Asian. But when I saw the dancing, I thought, oh, only if the choreographic standard is there, it would be a much better ballet. That could be the signature ballet, but it didn't get there.
I'm with Lee on that. I think I'm a good salesman, but I don't think I could sell Taking Tiger Mountain by strategy.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I thank you very much for attending, and will you join with me in thanking our guests?
Thank you.